Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Christian Underground Podcast. I am so excited. I'm here with my friend Nick Fischer, who is the founder of the Kevlar Joe's Coffee Company, which
Yes.
honestly, I have to tell you, I've gone through all of the coffee you sent me. The only thing I've got left is the espresso. And when I had some of that, I was wired. But it is incredible coffee. I
Awesome.
am just, yeah, I just absolutely love it. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. Those were very kind words about the coffee. That I do put a little TLC into it every batch. But I do want to say thank you for having me on. It is an honor. It's kind of hard to fill his shoes after you've had guests like Derek Gilbert on, um, and a plethora of others. I can't remember them all. So
Yeah.
thank you for having me on. So I will try to live up to their standards.
Well, I try to live up to their standards on a daily basis. So I hear you. They are, you are correct. They are amazing guests. Yeah, we've had Derek Gilbert, the godfather of Christian fringe podcasts, is what I
Hmm.
call him. We had Vicky Joy Anderson. We've
Oh yeah.
had Karen Wilkinson. We had Paul Stobbs last week. So it's been an amazing journey. God has definitely blessed this effort. We are, I owe it all to the fans. I mean, I'll be honest with you. They are incredible. We're approaching 100 hours of view time. We're almost at 250 views. We're only 8 episodes in, so it's huge.
That's
I'm so
fantastic.
excited. Yeah. Well, Nick, and I will be honest with you. I have been looking forward to this interview since we agreed to it. I've been a
Awesome.
huge
So have
fan of
I.
yours. I've been a huge fan of yours since I heard your interview on Camp Herman.
Oh gosh.
Um,
Okay.
I really enjoyed your story, but I want to get a little bit deeper into Kevlar Joe's and what
Sure.
Kevlar
Yeah.
Joe's is about. So let's talk some coffee. Let's do a little coffee talk.
Coffee
Little Linda
talk.
Richmond. Yeah, a little coffee
Gosh.
talk. Discuss.
Where to start? Well, Kevlar Joe's, and you might not even know this, but Kevlar Joe's is only a side gig of mine.
Mm.
It's a home-based business. I'm actually a full-time law enforcement officer. So that's my full-time gig. So when I'm not out there, I'm in my garage roasting coffee, lots of coffee on a daily basis, and it never ends. Caffeine everywhere. It's got to flow. Um,
That's right.
but uh but yeah, no, so basically, gosh, what was it? At the end of 2021, my wife and I, we started experimenting with coffee, right? So I was trying to
Mm.
figure out what to do. What's my backup plan with all the craziness going on? And I thought to myself, well, they say what do what you love. So I was like, I love coffee. So I went online, I ordered a how-to book and a bag of green coffee beans, and I started experimenting in my kitchen with an iron skillet, just like stirring it with a wooden spoon. And my wife hated it because the whole kitchen was constantly filled with smoke. And as you roast the coffee beans, like the skin peels off, so there's like skin, like the little coffee chaff flying all over the kitchen. It's in between everything. It's in the dishes. It's in the cabinet. So my wife was not a fan at all. So eventually I upgraded to a larger roaster in the garage, and it's taken off since.
Mm. Oh, wow, wow. Well, I am like I said, I'm a huge fan of the coffee. I love coffee too. You being law enforcement lets me realize how important coffee really is for you.
Oh no. So going back, gosh, years ago, um, I worked nights when I was deployed in Afghanistan, and
Mm,
I'd be so exhausted every night. And so I'd go to being Air Force Security Forces
mm.
veteran, by the way. So I would spend
Thank you for your
all night
service.
long. Thanks. Um, I would spend all night long on the flight line watching planes take off, and our job is to guard the airfield. And so we had this one little shack where we had a pot of coffee. So I'd always go over there, and it was the worst coffee possible. It was just stale and just dirt water, but it gave me caffeine. And so I was always like, man, how could I make a really good cup of coffee? And so that's been kind of my motivation over the years. I'm like, one day I think I'll have to figure out how to make my own coffee, and it's going to be good. It's going to be dark. And I made it happen. So,
Yeah, yeah. So you started the business literally in your kitchen. You're
Yes,
smoking your family out of their house.
absolutely.
All right. Which is just the greatest story ever. I love
The
that.
caffeine's got to flow.
The caffeine's got to flow. Love it. Love it. Love it. Okay, caffeine's got to flow. Absolutely true. I am a 2 cup warning guy. Don't
Yep.
talk to me in the morning until I've had my second cup. Um,
We all know
but
them.
yep, yep. All right. So you've moved it into your garage, right? You're roasting in your garage.
Yes, I've got about 5 roasters in the garage.
Okay.
They range from anything from like the little like stir crazy tops to I
Okay.
actually just got like a huge commercial roaster that's about the size of me. So very excited about it. So I'm still just trying to figure out the best method for utilizing everything I have right now. But it's working. Man, online sales have been crazy good. I'm
Good.
selling coffee out of a couple stores in the local area. In the southern St. Louis-ish area, St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
Missouri. And yeah, and there's a couple bakeries that they sell our coffee like to serve, you know. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it definitely keeps me busy. Definitely keeps me busy. But it's
Yeah.
where we are with it. I never expected this to happen. So it's pretty exciting, pretty fun. The fields that my import company gets the beans from, they're all organic and they're ethical, which means that there's no pesticides or fungicides in the
Mm-hmm.
coffee beans there. So the chances of having mold grow in them, which is an actual issue, that's a real problem. You're not going to get that, and it's gross, but you know that it's not slave labor in the fields because if you've ever researched unethical coffee, or yeah, you can call it blood coffee if you want, but
Yeah. Blood
um,
coffee. Yeah.
yeah. The slave labor in the fields or the unethical treatment, they don't treat the fields right. So like the people like live in the fields, like the workers, they live in the fields, defecate in the fields, they sleep in the
Mm.
fields. And you just know that the beans you're getting are not soaking up anything gross, while it's over
Mm-hmm.
there. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a big difference in the long run, and it's stuff you really don't think about until you start researching it. So
So the rantings of a highly caffeinated Christian is there, and love the coffee. So I was blessed by Nick, just to let everybody know, with a variety of coffee, and we went through it probably in a week. We absolutely loved it, and I would say that my breakfast blend. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I don't have the bag in front of me. I
it's
apologize.
called the Breakfast Joe.
The Breakfast Joe. All right. I'm loving it. A Joe here enjoyed his Breakfast Joe, probably the best. But the apple pie we had that last. And I will tell you, that was amazing.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah. I was like, oh my goodness, this is the perfect dessert coffee. I mean, it really is. It is so, it's, for those of you out there that maybe not know what we're talking about. Okay, so I would say that the Breakfast Joe is more of a it's a medium blend, would you say?
It's I would say it's about a light to a medium blend. I blend it up. So it's not necessarily just one or the other. It's a mixture of the both. But it's a Brazilian bean. So it's smooth, it's nutty, it's a little caramely, but it's not
Mhm.
overwhelming, it's not acidic.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly what I was gonna say. It has notes of caramel. It's very smooth. I love that smooth blend. And then the apple, I would say that it tastes like if you've ever had Quaker Oats apple cinnamon oatmeal with the way that the apple tastes when you get a piece of that dehydrated apple. That's what it tastes like. It's a great way. We drank it in the mornings when we were waking up. It was incredible. I loved it. Now I will be honest with you. The breakfast blend I enjoyed. I think there was the
There's the
Joe,
campfire Joe.
campfire Joe. That was incredible. But yeah,
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, I mean, there's not, and for the listeners that are out there and the people that are watching this on YouTube, subscribe, by the way, don't forget to subscribe. But I will highly recommend. You need to go find this. What's the website for
So
Kevlar Joe's?
www.kevlarjoe.com. And you can find us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well, just under Kevlar Joe's Coffee Company.
Because I mean, being in the military, if we took kids, right,
Mm-hmm.
and just Here you go. Here's a gun. Here's a rifle. Here's your equipment. There's the battlefield. Enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Without knowing what you're how to use what you're equipped with, you're useless. You can have all the gizmos and all the gadgets in the world, but if you don't know the tools that you have, you're not worth anything out there against someone who knows the tools that they have. And that's why
Mm,
God does equip us or give us the tools. He gives us his word, and we can learn everything from his word. So we have everything we need to equip ourselves because the devil knows what he's doing, and that's why we need to
mhm.
know our tools.
Yeah. And now imagine, though, and this is where I'm getting to. Imagine if we hand you your tools, we hand you the manuals, and we go teach yourself. And then in a month, you're going to go to, we're going to we expect you to know everything that's in those manuals. We expect you to know everything. We expect you to utilize your rifle effectively and with marksmanship. We expect you to know how to use your knife. We know how to expect you to use your everything, the radio, everything that we're going to give you. Oh, and by the way, you need to be incredibly proficient in it. And we're going to send you out against an enemy that is very well trained and much more ancient than you. We'd get slaughtered. And yet,
Yep.
that's what we do to Christians.
Mm-hmm.
We do that to baby Christians. We go, here you go, Christians. Now, you're going to come to a training once a week, and we're going to talk about things that make us feel good. We're not going to talk about the things that are weird. We're not going to talk about the things that you're going to be facing in the battlefield and how to handle it and how to equip you. We're not going to equip you. We're going to have a feel good meeting where we leave feeling really really good about ourselves, and then we're going to send you out into a battlefield that you're woefully ill equipped, and then expect you to know how to handle it when the enemy comes knocking at your door, literally, or showing up in your bedroom and saying, "Hi."
Mm-hmm.
And you go, "Huh?" And then when you go to your pastor and you're like, "I need you to help me. I've got this thing in my house, or I'm seeing these things up in the sky. I don't know what I'm
Mm.
seeing." And the pastor looks at you like, "Oh, you're just crazy."
I was going to say, not only you're talking about ill-equipped Christians, but you're hoping you can go back to a church that would even acknowledge that the things that happen in the spiritual realm really happen, and they're even going to acknowledge that you're not crazy yourself. I mean, I could go on about that, but no, continue your story.
No, you
Yes,
should
absolutely.
honestly go on with it, because that's what we're that's why I started this podcast. Is
Mm-hmm.
one, I wanted to give a space that shows Christians, yeah, the shadow figures you're seeing at night are real. They're
And you're
not
not
your
a bad
brain.
person if you're seeing them.
Exactly. And yeah, when you were out camping and you saw the big hairy guy walking across, that wasn't you losing your mind. That
Mm-hmm.
there is a blurry world. Sorry, Nate and Luke, but there's a blurry world
Copyright infringement.
out. Copyright infringement. I'll pay the fine. Matter of fact, come on my show, and you can collect. Um, I've invited him on a couple of times, and I'm not bitter at all. I'm just being funny. Um, but but yeah, I mean, you see these things. You see the Wendigo, you see the Puckwudgie, you see the
Mm-hmm.
Mothman, you see these cryptids that are out there, you know, and you're like, well, I didn't see that. Or you feel like you can't go to anybody and talk about it because you can't go to your pastor, because your pastor, more than likely, if they went to seminary, court, like what Dr. Heiser says, they get maybe
Mm-hmm.
what, 60 minutes on the supernatural, and that's it.
Something like
Their
that, yeah.
entire Yeah, their entire degree. And so when I found Dr. Heiser, and it opened this whole world to me. And I'm so glad it was, because I mean, I grew up, I never talked about it with anybody. I
Mm-hmm.
went through things. I mean, I talk openly about it now. And the funny thing is like I talk about the haunted house that I lived in, that my sister-in-law lived in before I did. And she didn't experience the same things I experienced. Or she didn't experience anything, at least that's what she says. Yet my wife and I did. And she's like, that never happened. I mean, she will literally tell me to my face that it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
That's
like,
wild.
yeah. And I'm like, sweetie, I know what happened to me. I know what I experienced. Well, that didn't happen. I'm like, okay, well, Go over there. I'm talking to my friend, So that's what
Mhm.
I'm talking about. So I created this podcast to create a space that not only offers people like Derek Gilbert, Vicky Joy Anderson. We're going to be having some other people come on the show here in the future. We've got Dr. Judd Burton coming onto the show. We've got Travis from Giants of America, who's going to be talking about the Giants,
Mhm.
the mound builders, those types of things. Like we got some really great people that are coming, and so it's one of those things that we're looking at that and going, okay, this is, and the Lord's really blessing this. But that's the thing, is that's who I want to speak to. I mean, we're about 45 minutes into, um, or yeah, well, no, yeah, we're about 45 minutes or maybe an hour into this. And I just want people to know, if you're listening to this and you've experienced these things, you're not crazy. All right. And don't let anybody tell you you're crazy. Now, I don't know. You may be crazy. I don't know. Maybe you need to go take your meds, but most of the time you're not. And you really are experiencing these things. And these things are out there. And there is an unseen realm that is out there. And I highly encourage you to do the research. But more importantly, you need to find resources like the Christian Underground podcast, like Camp Ramon, like Blurry Creatures. Um, Go out there and find the people that are actively working in this realm, that are actively fighting in this realm, um, that know how to use the word, that know how to use their equipment. Seek them out and have them show you these things. Because if you try to fight these things and you're ill prepared, it's like the guys that tried to cast out the demons in Jesus' name, but they didn't know Jesus. They just saw it as a ploy, and they're like, "Oh, well, we'll use Jesus' name and we'll cast these demons out." And the demons jumped on them and beat them and stripped them of their clothes. Right?
Mhm.
So that's what we're talking about. But anyways, I digress. Sorry about the long rant, but I just had to let it out. It's a pressure cooker.
It's good. People need to hear it.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, man. You're kind. But let's move into now. So normally I start this podcast out and I ask 4 questions, and I'm not going to get into the 4 questions. My wife has actually asked me to stop doing that. She's like, I don't like that. I'm like, okay, all right, I won't do it. But one of the questions that I would ask is, have you had anything strange happen to you? And that is now what we're going to get into, and that's what we're going to finish the show with. And
Okay.
here's the thing, I really don't care how long it takes you to tell this story, because this is the reason why I really wanted to get you on the show, was because I heard this story and I was just like, wow. Not only it's full of intrigue, adventure. I mean, you could have lost your life
Yeah.
during this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so
Very
I want
close.
people to hear. I want people. Not only do I want to hear people hear, but I want them to hear this story. So without further gilding the lily, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Um, well, yeah, I've had quite a a a few weird, strange things happen. I've had sleep paralysis my entire
Mm,
life, mostly, and that's been an ongoing issue, and it's gone away for years at a time, and it's come back. And it's funny we talked about that because I've heard people say like, "Oh, you're not really a Christian if you deal with sleep paralysis, or you're not saved." And that's just one of those things where like people need to be very careful about who they listen to and what you're experiencing, and you need to ground yourself in um, a true biblical church or community, whatever kind of group you're part of, because you need to make sure that you're getting solid scripture in what you're doing. And if you are experiencing stuff like sleep paralysis, that doesn't mean you're a bad Christian or you're not a Christian. Um, but that is not the story we're talking about today. So this
That's still good,
happened.
because we had Vicky Joy Anderson on the show, which was about
Yeah.
sleep paralysis. And
Mm-hmm.
matter of fact, she's in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, that's
I think
right.
she
I
lives
forgot
up in
about that.
Missouri.
Yep, she
Yeah.
does.
Anyways, anyways. All right.
Um,
So yes, let's go into the story of the Irish wilderness. Let's go
yes,
into that.
yes. So this happened, I want to say in the summer of 2022. I think it's been a year and a half now. Um, it was gosh, it was around Father's Day. So this is right when I was dealing with getting kicked out of the Air Force, and that meant a lot to me. So my wife kept asking me, "What do you want to do for Father's Day?" And I kept putting it off, kept putting it off. I said, don't worry about it. That's whatever. And she kept saying, like, "Why don't you go for a hike? You love to hike." And so I've been doing some research on some really long hikes because I love wilderness hiking. And so I it was about 11 o'clock in the afternoon, or morning, however you want to say that. But I told my wife, like, you know what? I think I will go hiking. And I think I'm going to go to the Irish Wilderness, which is in southern Missouri. It's about a 3 hour drive. And she said, okay, cool. Just try to be back before night. But if you camp, don't worry about it. Like I'll let you camp out there. No, not a big deal. So I'm thinking to myself that I can go knock out about a 20-mile hike before it gets dark, which is a wild thought looking back on it. But anyways, so I drive 3 hours south to this place. I find it. I've never been there before. I throw on my hiking bag because I keep like a bug out bag in my car at all times. So I start my hike. I'm not going out there looking for anything weird. I'm just going out there because I wanted a challenge. I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to do something that was physically exhausting. I wanted to kind of just think about everything I've been going through with the past year with the Air Force and just be alone and pray. And I downloaded a bunch of Derek Gilbert's A View from the Bunker episodes and with my on my phone so I could listen to that while I was hiking through the areas without service. So
If the people want to know why I'm laughing, I'll just tell you this is it, because when you hear the rest of the story, you're gonna be like, okay, you're listening to weirdness and you're about to experience high strangeness. Okay,
yeah, it was wild.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
no, so I go out there and I start hiking. So the trail, it's hard to explain. So if any you want to look it up, it's the Irish Wilderness in southern Missouri. It's like a 18 to 20-mile trail. It just depends on which paths you take. And so when you start on the start on the trail from where I was, you could either go north or south. So at first I started hiking south, but everything in me kept saying, Nick, turn north. And I was like, nah, I'm gonna go south because I had it in my mind that I would be hiking into the sunset. But my gut kept saying, Nick, go north. So I was like, fine, whatever. So I went north. And I turned around and I want to say like 10 minutes into it, I saw this really weird collection of what I thought was just a bunch of trees leaning up against each other. And I thought, huh, that's kind of like a tree structure. And if you know anything about, Bigfoot lore, can I say call it Bigfoot lore? Um,
Mhm.
Sasquatch will, or Bigfoot, the big feet will take trees and they'll make weird kind of teepees out of them, just marking their territory, saying, hey, we live here. This is our area. If there's anything else to it, I don't know, but it's something that they do to mark territory. And I remember thinking that's really weird looking. So I walked up to it because now my mind's really curious. And I walk up to it thinking it's a bunch of trees just leaning against each other. And as I walk up, I notice that none of these trees are growing out of the ground. They've all been placed in this weird teepee fashion. And I remember thinking that's really, really weird. But I'm gonna forget about that. Not a big deal. And I keep on hiking. And only like 5 minutes down the trail, I come across what is a tree, a thick tree, and it's broken and laid over the trail. So you have to duck under it. And I'm like, that's really weird because another symptom of being in Bigfoot territory is Bigfoot, breaking a tree and laying it over the trail just like that. So you have to duck under, almost like a gate. And I remember thinking, that's weird. Two symptoms of Bigfoot stuff. Definitely not going to be Bigfoot stuff. I'm just a Bigfoot nerd, so I'm overthinking it. What about now?
Okay, now, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Okay.
so you're gonna
Um,
it's my connection, so I apologize. We'll get back to it. So you started your Bigfoot nerd. Continue from there.
yeah. So for the next 5 hours, I'm just hiking up and down these hills. And if you ever get into pathfinding, sometimes you'll lose a trail. And so one thing that I've learned to do from the military is I'll search for things in concentric trails. So I start in the middle and I slowly work my way out until I can kind of catch the trail again. And so, it would take me 20 minutes here and there to find the trail again, but I would keep hiking. Um, and so I would go through some really dense areas and I would think like, okay, I can't turn around here. I definitely got to finish this hike no matter what. Not a big deal. I'm maybe 5 miles in, maybe 10 miles in. Um, and so I think at one point I was crossing these really dangerous cliffs. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, if I came here at night, I would definitely stumble and die. So at that point, I remember thinking, I can't turn around at this point because I don't have enough sunlight to get home. Easy stuff, right? Um, and when I was up there, I kept hearing someone running. And this is something I don't think I told in the last story. I kept thinking I heard someone running up and down the hill because I also heard what sounded like a jet ski on the river somewhere nearby. And I remember
Mhm.
thinking, or I don't know what it was. I just remember thinking, like, oh, is there someone on the trails too? Like someone's out here. And I kind of waited, expecting hikers any moment. And nothing happened. And eventually I called out, like, hey, another hiker on the trail, because it's kind of like this really rocky area. And I never end up seeing anyone running around, but I could have heard somebody was walking around up there. I thought they were. So I thought I'd see hikers. Anyways, I've never really talked about that before because I assumed it was other hikers, but now that I'm telling you this story, I'm like, that is weird. Anyways, um,
Mhm.
so I continue hiking, and I have to get this right. So whew, I get on top of this hill that I can kind of oversee everything. And I get to the point where I keep losing the trail and I keep finding it again. But at one point, I lose the trail, and okay, so I'm walking around. I'm trying to find out where the trail picks up again, and I cannot find it. And at this point, I remember thinking I've spent 40 minutes, 45 minutes trying to find the trail again, and the sun is now going down over the hills. And so if you look at the map, you have the so if we're looking at a map and this is the edges of the wilderness, this is the river. My car is here, parked somewhere over here, like 10 miles away. I don't know. So I'm way over here. There's no way I can turn around and go straight through the wilderness off the trail. Well, that is what I try to do. But there's no way I can go that way. So I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll go back the way I came. But then I think, no, if the sun goes down, I'll never make it past those cliffs at night. So I'll be stuck here overnight. So I think to myself, if I can't find the trail, I'll get out my compass and I'll try to go east. Um, because I remember thinking to myself, like, if I just keep walking through the wilderness, eventually I'd end up near the road somewhere where my car is. Um, and so I took a picture of the map on my phone. So I was using that. I had a had a spare map in my pocket, so I can kind of gauge where I was, um, just orientating myself. So I decide here's I'm going to do it. So I take out my compass and I start walking east off the trail, and I go up and down these hills, and eventually I find myself at this creek. So So I look at my map and I'm at it was White's Creek that goes out to the 11 Point River. And so I'm looking at the map. I'm like, okay, cool. So I've virtually gone nowhere. So I decided I'm just going to follow the creek back. And so I start following the creek east, hoping, I'll cut through the wilderness or something. But, I kept hiking forever and I kept thinking like I can't just keep following the creek because it winds north and south so much. So I decided to cut through the wilderness again. So I tried cutting through the wilderness. And at some point I got so turned around, I found myself back at the creek, back where I had first found the creek. And I'm like, this is really weird. So I tried looking on my map. And if when I'm looking on my map, I took a screenshot of it says that there should be like a float camp on the other side of the river. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, so I explore the area I'm at. I cross the creek, and I'm thinking, okay, I'll just follow the creek back out to the river, and maybe I'll see some people floating or something. I don't know. But at this point, I think it was like 8:30 at night. It's getting dark, and I have my flashlight with me. So I hike out towards the river, and at one point, I remember thinking like okay, I need to I need to cross I need to cross the creek once more. So I start crossing the creek and I'm up to like my waist. I'm soaking wet. And I get to the other side of the creek and I'm thinking, okay, I'll find the river. I'll call out for help to where the float camp is on the other side of the river. Um, and so I remember I crossed the river. And so of course I'm not at this point, I'm not going through anything that's a trail. It's all just straight bush, like up to like my chin. It's wild. And so I'm just kind of trying to follow my compass. I'm trying to get out to the river. I'm just going through bush and climbing over trees, and I'm getting caught in I think it's called a cat claw. It's just basically just like viney thorns everywhere. It's miserable. And so the weirdest thing happened. I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I climb over this log, and I find a little clearing. And I mean, I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I find a bed of limbs. I find yeah, it's a bed made out of tree limbs with 550 cord, leaves stuffed under it with a trash bag over it. So someone had made padding there. And at that point, I'm thinking, wow, this the only person who could be living out here is a fugitive or a feral person, like like in the Appalachians or something. So I pull out my
Yeah.
gun, and I didn't chamber it around yet because I'm in a federal park and I'm trying to be good. So I chamber around right after that. So I'm carrying my gun out, low ready, because I'm like someone's out here with me. Um, so I eventually I still bypass it and I go to the river. I'm calling out. I'm like, "Hello, anyone there?" Just across the river, and of course nobody answers. I don't see any sign of any kind of a float camp or anything. So I'm thinking, okay, so this is a fool's errand. So I eventually I go back through all the brush. I pass by that weird bed again. Um, and I go out to the creek and I start walking along the creek again because I'm just debating what to do with myself. Um, Now at this point, I'm pretty sure I'd already tried to just hike east through the wilderness multiple times and just found myself back at the same spot in the creek. It was kind of Lovecraftian, like I just kept finding myself at the same place over and over again. Um, and So then, while I was walking along the creek, I saw what looked like a dilapidated dock on the other side of the creek. It looked like there had been some like wooden stairs that led up to one side of the shoreline, and some wood that was just kind of washed up next to it. So I take my bag off, and Vietnam style, I've got the bag over my head. I'm wading across the river or the creek. The creek's
Oh,
like up to my
Rambo.
chest. Yeah. And so I eventually get up these stairs. I climb up and I find what is like an abandoned campsite. It's not on the map, so maybe Google Maps had it like the float camp on the wrong side. But I find what I think is an abandoned camp. And there's some picnic benches there. Um, and there's like an old basically a lot of trash. And so I'm thinking, okay, cool. So there's got to be a trail somewhere. So I start searching that area for the trail. And gosh, what was it? Whew, I think, yeah. So I found the trail, and I remember thinking, or I found this weird campsite, and I remember thinking I couldn't find a trail yet. So I was like, okay, well, doesn't matter. I'm just gonna hike east again. So I start hiking east, and it's dark this time, and I follow the creek again. It's like, what is it? What's the definition of like insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again.
That's
Um,
Einstein's definition for sure.
Yes. And so this time though, I found myself, previously to this, I had passed a series of large caves on the creek. Very ominous looking caves that gave me the heebie jeebies. Yeah, the first time, sorry, I got to backtrack a little. The first time I
No,
went
you're
off the
good.
trail, following my compass to go east, when I first found the creek, on the other side were these giant caves. And I remember researching the Ozark, I'm in the Ozarks, researching like the Ozark lore in the area, and the Osage Indians had lived in the caves in the Irish wilderness. Um, and I got to take a pause and tell you the backstory of the Irish wilderness. I don't know if I've told you. The
Mm-mm.
reason why it's called the Irish wilderness in the middle of Missouri is because at one point the Irish wilderness was inhabited by Irish settlers.
Okay.
And they had a priest. They're all Catholic, and they had a priest from Chicago that would come down to visit every once in a while, check up on his Irish kin. And at some point, the Civil War kicks off, and so the Missouri was a Confederate state. So back and forth, the Union and the Confederates would take the area back and forth, lots of skirmishes. So after the war, that Irish priest comes down to check on his people. Lo and behold, it's like Roanoke. It's all gone. There's no sign of anything. Um, and so that's why it was forever called the Irish Wilderness. So it's just a mystery. So I guess possibly everything was destroyed. Everyone moved out during the war. But apparently there's on the south side of the wilderness somewhere, apparently there's a chimney you can find, but it's nowhere near where the town was, which is very odd. So anyways, so I find the caves, these big caves, and I mean they're tall. Like I could walk and like someone much taller than me could go through these caves without hitting their head. And during the daylight, they gave me the heebie-jeebies. I just remember wanting to get
Mm.
away from it as fast as I could. So
Mm.
now this time when I crossed them at night with my flashlight, I remember thinking, I just want to get away. Like I felt so uncomfortable being near these caves. So I just got away as soon as I could. So, so eventually, I hiked back to the river thinking, what am I going to do? I'm starting to run out of water. I've run out of all my snacks for the most part in my bag. Um, I later found out it was the hottest day of the year. So I'm
Mm.
sweating buckets. And this is I didn't train for any of this. I'm kind of reckless like that sometimes. Um, but so eventually I'm hanging out in the dilapidated campsite and I decide, you know what? I'm just gonna explore more. And somehow at that point when I was exploring, I found like one of those I found a trail that connected to it. It wasn't very well marked. But it it had one of those visitor like login sheets on it, like those little
Mm.
posts you could find. So I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
this time I should probably I'll write a little note in here in case I disappear on the trail so people know I was here. I open it up and of course flies and disgusting things all fly out and there's no paper in there. And I was like, yeah, of course. Um,
Mhm.
so I start following the trail. Um, and basically it kind of winds away from this campsite a little bit. It goes down into a creek. It's a different creek. Um, and it starts following another creek that fed into the Whites Creek. Um, and so I'm by myself. It's I think it's like 9:30 at night. Um, I've got my flashlight out. I'm just walking up this hill, and then the creek to my left. I mean, I wouldn't have known it until now, but it was quiet. I mean, there's nothing out there but me. I hadn't seen any wild animals all day, nothing. And then there was just an explosion in the creek next to me. I mean, it was loud. It was like earth-shatteringly loud, and of course, I froze dead in my tracks, um, because everything was just quiet until I heard this something loud had just like splashed cannonball into the creek next to me, and I froze. And the first thing that came into my mind was something just threw a very large rock into the woods and I mean into the creek. And so my mind immediately starts thinking Bigfoot. I am in Bigfoot
Mhm.
territory and Bigfoot just threw a giant stone into the creek. But I
Mhm.
first thing I did though was when I froze and then I looked over and I shined my light into the water, waiting to see if maybe there's a tree above us that something had fallen and crashed into the water. Of course, it would float back up, right? But I can find the center. I see all the ripples coming out from wherever the rock landed in the middle of the creek. Um, I see the ripples. Nothing floats to the surface, so it wasn't an animal fell off, something and floated to the surface. Um, no, or jumped in. No log or limb floated to the surface. It was a rock, and I think once you get used to being outdoors, you can tell the difference between like something falling and like a limb falling into the water and like a stone crashing into the water. And so at that point, I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like the things I saw like 5 hours ago, like was that really like Bigfoot symptoms? Like Bigfoot like marking saying don't go this way after I ducked under the thing, like after I ducked under the branch, which is
Mhm.
usually like a
Mhm.
sign saying don't go this way. Um,
Mhm.
and I didn't know what to do. I looked around. I mean, the hill I was on was gradual. It was a slow gradual, like it leveled out, and so was the hill on the other side. So if a rock was tumbling down the hill, you would have heard it tumbling down the hill. Um,
Mhm.
you would have heard something falling down the hill. Um, but it was just the crash came out of nowhere. So something had lobbed something big fell out of
Mhm.
nowhere into the middle of the creek. And I sorry, this is like me
Mhm.
just describing for 5 minutes how something big hit the water out of nowhere while everything else was dead quiet.
Hey,
I remember thinking,
it would have scared me so bad I would have been changing my pants. So it's
dude, I remember
okay.
thinking like, okay, so at this time, this is before we started fostering, so I only had 3 kids at home. I remember thinking like, oh gosh, I can't turn around from here. If I turn around, if I'm really going into Bigfoot territory, I have nowhere to turn around to because I'm just going to go out to the creek where I'm probably just going to have heat exhaustion and die in the middle of the wilderness because it was a holiday. I can't remember what holiday follows Father's Day or whatever. It was like the week before or after Father's Day. It was supposed to be my outing,
Mm.
but it was a holiday, so no one would be out in the wilderness. Um, I highly doubted there'd be any rangers patrolling this area. But anyway, so I'm thinking to myself, I have to go forward. I have to go up this hill, but I think something just warned me to stop going up this hill. Um, and there's a thousand ways you could say like, oh, it could be in anything that fell in the water, but all I can say from my experience was something huge and heavy crashed into that water. It was clearly a rock, and nothing floated back up to the surface. And I would have heard a rock tumbling down these hills, let alone what could have been throwing a rock. What would have made a rock tumble down these hills, anyways? I'm not in the Rockies. I'm in Missouri. Um,
Hmm.
so anyway, so I tell myself I gotta get home. Like I'm at the point where like this is getting serious. Like I'm lost in the I'm not lost. I was on a trail and had a compass, but I joke. But I'm in the wilderness. I'm on a trail. I'm completely exhausted. I'm out of water. I just gotta follow this trail because if I follow the trail, I can eventually get home, right?
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
start heading up this hill, and I'm telling myself like, Nick, you don't have a choice. This is how people die. You've pushed your luck enough over the years, and this is serious. So I continue up the hill, and I don't know how much into Bigfoot lore you or your listeners might be into, but one thing that's kind of a common symptom is having like a tree, having like a branch, broken and bent, pointing in a certain direction where you're coming from, and that's saying, hey, don't keep going this way, go the other way. Um,
Mm.
and so a myriad of like any kind of weird Bigfoot research, you'll come across that. So I'm going up this hill, and there's a branch broken. Everything's pristine around me, and this one tree happens to be broken, and the branch is pointing in the opposite direction of where I'm hiking. And I remember thinking to myself, that's a Bigfoot thing, but I don't have time for that. I got to keep walking. I'm going to ignore that. That's just a broken limb. So I keep going up this hill, and there's another branch broken in the same fashion, pointing to back the direction I'm coming from on the left side. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my, I'm thinking this is real. And I start repenting immediately to God, saying, God, I'm so sorry. I went looking for an adventure. I should just be happy at home with my family. I did not need this. I know I wanted a Bigfoot experience my whole life, but this is bad. I am so sorry. Like I felt like it was a
Hmm.
punishment. Like you got what you asked for, you know. So I keep going up the hill, and there's another broken branch on my right again. And as I continue up the hill, there's another one on my left. And I am so scared at this point. Like, I don't think I've ever been this scared in my entire life, because I know I'm alone in the wilderness, exhausted, lost in the middle of the night, and something big had thrown, or something big fell in the water, but something big had thrown a huge rock into the water, and it didn't just tumble down the hill. Um, and so I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm really in Bigfoot territory. This is wild. But I got to get home. I have to survive. So I kept telling myself, like, just keep, every step forward is another step forward. So I just kept going. Um, and at some point, going up this big hill, um, I heard, I would say like 150 feet to my right, I heard what was it sounded like a howl, like a dog
Mm.
howling, but then it
Hmm.
like it slowly evolved into like a guttural growl, like a deep guttural growl. And I remember thinking
Hmm.
to myself at first, like, could that have been a coyote? No, that doesn't sound like a coyote at all. But then it started growling. So I thought maybe I've just never heard. I mean, I've heard wild boar, like I've heard them before. Maybe I just haven't heard this one in the wild before. Maybe that was a boar. Because there's tons of wild boar in southern Missouri. Um, and so I remember thinking that was really weird, because that was the first animal I'd heard all night. So it was a howl that turned into a growl, and I just remember thinking that's super odd. So I just kept going up the hill, um, and while I went up this hill, and I got to remember which order this happened in. Um, I started hearing something tumbled down the hill this time. It was like a rock had been thrown down the hill and it was tumbling. So this I could hear for the first time. This is what a rock sounds like tumbling down the hill on my right. And I'm thinking, I don't even know what to do. I just keep walking up the hill, thinking like I can't turn around because I'm going to go die at that deserted campsite. I got to follow this trail. And then I start noticing something keeps moving on the right side of me in the trees. And eventually, as I keep walking up the hill, um, it gets louder and louder on my right, as if something is paralleling me. Um, but the gate, now someone had asked me this question before, like, could it have been a wild boar? You heard something howling or growling, but you know the difference between the gait of a four-legged critter and someone who walks on 2 feet, right? Um, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, this is it. Um, gosh, I don't even know. It was just a really wild experience because I kept telling myself I have to get home. I have to survive. I just have to keep walking. I can't turn around. I have to follow this way out of the wilderness because this is the trail.
Hmm.
And then a rock or boulder, whatever it was, I never saw it, but it tumbled down on the left side of me as I went up this hill. And I remember thinking, like, gosh, I could say I kept thinking, but I kept just being terrified, thinking this is it. I got to keep going. I don't have a choice. And then I hear something moving constantly on my left as well. And I'm thinking they're on both sides of me, whatever this is. It's walking on 2 feet. And I remember the one on my left, whatever it was out there, I could hear it moving somewhere constantly around me. And I remember thinking, oh, I got goosebumps talking about this. I remember thinking, like, I'm not thinking about that because whatever was on my right was so close.
Mm.
It felt like it was like right on the other side of the trees. Um, and I just remember thinking, like, at what point, now I didn't know. I'm a big Bigfoot guy, but I didn't know until afterwards that paralleling is a common Bigfoot like symptom. Like they'll follow people on
Mhm.
trails and just walk, like 10, 20 feet away from them, just paralleling their same direction. But whatever was on my right was walking very closely. And I try to tell a story objectively without constantly throwing in Bigfoot, just being like, this is what I experienced. Um,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
yeah, so I keep walking. It's on my right, and at this point I'm thinking, I've heard so many stories where Bigfoot, they know they're being followed. And eventually, Bigfoot steps out of the trail and just starts screaming at them or chasing them. And at this point, I'm just waiting, any second for it to step out. Like it's so close and it's so loud. I'm just waiting. Any second is going to step out, and I keep looking behind me, like expecting there to be like 10, right behind me or something. So I keep flashing my light back there. I'm constantly checking everything around me, like because as powerless as I am at the situation, like I'm trying to watch my six, I'm trying to see everything around me. And at I can't remember at which point this was, but so this thing's on my right. Um, and so a lot of the Bigfoot stuff I've been listening to recently, basically I had learned enough that having my gun out would have been detrimental because I
Mm.
personally I don't think I could have taken on a Bigfoot with my 9 mil.
Mm. Mhm.
But I remember thinking like I'm not here to fight, so I'm going to. I don't want to sound too hokey, but I want to have good vibes. Like
Mm.
I'm here in peace. Like I don't want to
Right.
be confrontational. I don't want to show any kind of sign of trying to fight or. So I don't take my gun out because at this point,
Mhm.
like I'm fully 100% into believing that there's a Bigfoot next to me. And so I'm trying to do all the smart stuff that I've heard campers and hikers say. Um, and so at one point, like this is really weird. Well, I'll get to that later. So at this point, I remember thinking people have hikers in distress have tried to talk to Bigfoot. So at one point, um, I just keep walking, but I say out loud, I'm really sorry. I'm in your home right now, but I just want to go home too. And I just keep on walking.
Mhm.
I don't know what else to do. Like
Mhm.
um, so I keep walking. There's the noises to my right are still happening, but I start noticing that the trail keeps disappearing. So I keep having to find my trail again. Um,
Mhm.
and as I'm going, I notice like at one point I find these on the right side of me. I see this really weird formation of rocks. I see two sets of them, and they look like it's three sides. It looks like a door frame, with no bottom. And I remember thinking that looks really weird, but I don't have time for this. I have to keep going because I think I'm being stalked by a Bigfoot.
Right.
But I remember thinking like I'm seeing really weird stuff and experiencing really weird stuff tonight, but I just have to survive. So I just keep walking, and eventually I realize that the trail is gone. I can't find where it goes off to, and then I realize my goosebumps are all gone. The hair is not standing up on the back of my neck anymore. And I realize that I don't think I'm being followed anymore. Now I'm lost on top of this giant hill. Um, and I can see the trail behind me. I cannot find where it goes. Um,
And about what time is this? Is this in the evening?
I want to
Is
say this is like at 11 p.m., maybe.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, I got to get off this mountain. I don't know where I am. They're Missouri mountains, but I
Yeah,
can't go
it's
back.
still a mountain.
I can't go back down this trail. There's no way I'm going back down there. So I'm like, okay. So I find the cliff of this mountain, and I'm like, I guess I'll just scale down it. I don't know where I'm going, but I think my compass says I'm going east. Um, but who knows? At this point, whatever window area I'm in, I can't trust the compass, right? Um, so I start trying to climb down like the side of this hill, and it's really steep, and I'm just holding on to like branches and roots and just kind of sliding down. I'm completely caked with like mud and dirt, and it's disgusting. But my obliques start cramping as I'm going down this hill, and I remember thinking, I can't keep going like this. Like I'm in so much pain. This is how people die: heat exhaustion, cramped muscles in the middle of the wilderness at night. I'm going to die here.
Mm.
But I of course I keep going. I dig deep. I keep thinking like I gotta get home to my family. So I keep going down. So I get back on the trail. Well, sorry, I get down to I get to the bottom of this hill. I'm at the creek again.
Mm.
So I follow the creek back to the dilapidated campsite. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm back where I started. Whatever. So I kind of meander around. I try to go east again and again. I try to follow White's Creek back, and I just kept getting turned around. But at one point, I tried. I had to cut through trees a bunch because like the paths on like the creek were like too hard to get through, super hard to explain. But I kept having to cut through this like the trees, and at one point, like I when I got back to the creek, I kind of stumbled out in front of one of those caves again, and I kept feeling like, why do I keep ending up at these caves? And I was terrified. And I don't know if I told this part on Camp Vermont, but I remember looking down, and I was on the shore of the creek, and there was sand everywhere, and it looked like, for what it is, it looked like footprints everywhere on the sand. And I remember
Mm.
thinking, this is what I want, but I have to keep going because I think I'm being pursued or stalked. I'm not safe. And I remember thinking, I want to stay and examine all this, but I have to keep going. I was in such a survival mindset. I didn't care, which is it sounds weird like looking back on it, but like when you're physically exhausted and you're desperate to get home and terrified, like I could have cared less if I found like a baby Bigfoot, like I just wanted to go. Um,
Yeah.
so I get back eventually to the dilapidated campsite. I explore, because I couldn't get out of that area for some reason, and maybe that's Providence, like because you'll hear the story. But I get back out, and I think I find another trail, um, from the dilapidated campsite. So I try to follow it for a little bit, um, but something in my gut just gave me the heebie-jeebies and said, don't keep going. And I remember hearing like noises on the other side of these trees, and I just
Mm.
remember thinking like having this feeling of something malicious was there, like
Mm.
I don't know how to describe that. And I just kind of stumble back, like something about that area, because I keep hearing big things move. And so I stumble back to like the campsite, and at one point, like I jump out of my skin because I almost step on a family of armadillos because they all jump out of like the grass at once and they scare me. But it was also super comforting because I found a family of armadillos, and I was like, cool, they're doing all right. So I guess I could just hang out here for a second. Um, but did I lose you?
No, you're there.
Okay,
I can hear
cool.
you. Just your screen's frozen. There we go. You're back.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Gotcha. Um, so one point, and maybe it was, and I might have jumped over this, sorry. When I was going up the hill after uh I passed those branches, I think this was before I heard the howl. No, this was sorry. I apologize. There's a lot to it. While
Okay.
whatever it was that was following me on my right, the only animal I heard was this weird cuckoo sounding bird. It kept making this weird exotic sound, and I kept thinking like, oh, good, maybe I'm crazy because I hear something else in the woods. And so if there's a
Mhm.
predator like a Bigfoot, typically the woods get quiet. But all I could hear was one bird. I'm like, that's good. I hear a bird, right? But it was
Mhm.
really weird sounding. It was very exotic. It sounded like a cuckoo thing. So I kept following the trail. And I kept getting closer and closer to this bird, whatever tree it's in, because it won't shut up. But I've never heard a bird like this. It's nothing I've heard from Missouri. Um,
Mhm.
and eventually I'm at the tree that the bird is in, and it stops as I get under the tree. It stops cooing. And so I keep going. And after about 10, 15 feet, I heard the bird like start cooing again, you know? Um,
Mhm.
but when I say coo, it doesn't do it justice. It was just very exotic and weird sounding. Actually, Chris from Camp Vermont, he looked up a video, I think, and he played a sound of what someone said was like a baby Bigfoot. It sounded oddly similar. So
Yeah.
that's the
I
thing.
was going to ask you. I was going to ask you if you've heard the Sierra sounds.
Yes, I have. I wouldn't compare it to that.
Okay.
But that's also pretty absurd, you know.
Hmm.
Um, it was a very odd noise. Um, but gosh, I'll get at yeah. So that was weird. I heard a weird bird noise. It was the only thing I heard all night. And it happened while I thought, wait, here's the thing. I've heard of like Sasquatch stories about Sasquatch where they use bird noises to communicate with each other. And so it would be really weird if one was paralleling me and then there's another one making the noise up in the tree. I don't know. Whatever. Anyways, so back to the campsite. So I'm
Okay.
down there and I just have the heebie jeebies about going up that one path. Um, and I'm just super uncomfortable about it. Um, Something just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right, you know? Um, so anyway, so at one point I'm like, I'm looking at the river. I'm debating whether I can ford the river. But it's weird because everything was just so black out except for the stars. I mean, the whole tree line was just a black silhouette. It was beautiful, and
Hmm.
eerie. But I could see every star. I could see like the spiral arm of the galaxy. It was super cool. Um, but at some point, I don't remember, but I kind of stumbled on like the edge of the shoreline, and then I realized how shallow the 11 Point River was, and I was
Hmm.
like a little up my ankles, like halfway up to my knees, and I was like, okay, well, I looked at my map, and if I go like a mile or something north, I don't even, it probably wasn't a mile, but eventually there's like a boat ramp, and that boat ramp leads to an old dirt road that leads to a highway somewhere, or like an
Hmm.
old state highway.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking to myself, okay, cool. Well, I'm just going to follow this. I'm just going to follow this north. And so eventually, so I go from like sweating and super hot to like my teeth are chattering because I'm in the cold river, just trying to hike up the side. So eventually I find like a rafting area on the right side of the river where I'm trying to like walk up. It was a really weird, it's hard to explain, but I'm just kind of on the shoreline really quick, but I'm like holding onto trees because it gets really deep, or it's just like straight tree line. I'm kind of wading through it. And so eventually I find like a place where you could tell rafters stop because I see like a cooler and I get super excited because I'm super dehydrated. So I run over to the cooler, I flip it over, it's nothing but empty beer cans. Super disappointing. But I don't hang out there long because something big is like in the tree line around like this little sandy area, this little beachhead. And I remember thinking, like, my gosh, is something stuck? Is something following me? You know? And
Hmm.
when I was, I can't get into that. Sorry. Well, wait. But it feels
Okay.
malicious. It feels
Hmm.
dangerous. So I'm like, I just want to get away from this. So I get back on the river. I keep hiking north. Um, I just keep hiking north. And at one point, I'm so so tired. I think to myself, okay, Nick, I'm just gonna start drinking river water. And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, I got 45 minutes to an hour before I start pooping my brains out and vomiting. And maybe I'll get somewhere by then. So
Yep. Yep.
I just start like gulping river water, and so I'm drinking all this river water. It tastes really good. But then like as soon as like I get up from like lapping it into my mouth, I look up and like tons of goose poop like floats right next to me. It was disgusting. Um, but anyway, so I keep hiking, and at
Oh, the
one
lives
point,
of
like,
survival.
gosh, I know. At one point, I sit down like completely, like there's like a rocky shoreline. I sit down like in defeat, you know, like I'm so
Hmm.
close. Like I gotta dig deep, but like the right side of the river kind of like it goes up into like this rocky cliff that I can't follow, you know. And to do that, I'd have to go back to where like the woodline was and climb up there. But whatever I keep hearing in the woods, that super gives me this really dark fear, like this dark feeling.
Hmm.
I know I can't go up there. Like
Mm.
something's dangerous saying no. So I just kind of sit there in defeat for a couple minutes. I find some like some like trail mix and I eat them in my bag. And then I notice up the river a little bit. There's like a little like white water like splashing against something, and then I look and I realize that a tree floated down the river and got caught. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, so it's shallow enough there that a tree got caught floating down the river. So I'll try to wade through there, which I forgot to say that I've tried. I tried fording the river twice by now. Um, and I every time I try because it's not that deep, but the current was strong, and it gets up to like my stomach or my chest, and I lose my footing every time. I end up going under, and I end up like rolling myself into like shallower areas. And I remember thinking, this is how I die. This is how people die. They try to ford rivers in the middle of the
Yep.
night when they're lost. Yep, I'm going to die doing this. So I'm at this. So, anyways, I see where this tree is lodged in the middle of the river. And I think to myself, this is my only hope. I am going to try to ford the river. If I can get to that tree, I'm halfway. I'll hold on to the tree and maybe I'll just jump and I'll get carried by the river. I'll get carried by the current, but I'll be close enough that I can just like try and waller my way to the other side of the river. And it was like it was like a movie. Everything was just like in slow motion for me. I had my flashlight staring at my feet because it was super slippery. I was taking like baby steps, trying to hold on to like any rock in the water I could, and eventually I got to the tree. And for the first time, I remember thinking like, I might get out of here. So then I just kind of, it was more like I go as hard as I can to get to the other side of the river. It wasn't hard at all, but I was so excited. So I eventually get to the other side of the river after I crossed over this tree and held on to it. And I remember thinking when I crawled onto the shoreline for the first time that I had hope. And I remember thinking like I had this
Mm.
completely renewed energy like never before. And I'll tell you that this experience, nothing in the military, even deploying overseas, ever made me feel this desperate, so close to
Mm.
dying. The thirst and like fight for survival. I've never felt this before. So it was pretty wild. So for the first time, I have all night, I have real hope. So one thing I forgot to tell you was that I tried finding cell service so many times to call 911. Did not work because there's no cell service anywhere.
Mhm. Mhm.
So at this time on the left side of the river, um, I'm just hiking up the water like I had previously done before on the side of the river. Which I have my military bag with me, so my phone's in it. Somehow my phone survived getting dunked underwater every time. So it was a really good bag. Highly recommend Gore-Tex products. Um,
Yes, yes. Good bags.
yes. Um, and so eventually I see it looks like an orb in the river. And I'm looking at it, and I realize, oh, it's a lamppost. I kept like hiking closer. What is it? And I realized like, oh, good, that's the landing. That's gotta be landing. Someone's up there. I'm so excited. So I get close. At this point, like the water was like really sandy, got deep randomly. So I'm like sinking into the water, splashing. I'm like, help! Hey, I'm here. I'm in the river. Hey, I'm not trying to scare you guys. Like I'm trying to warn them in case they're like, trigger happy or something weird happened that night. Like I don't want to jump up on the campsite and get shot. So I'm
Hmm.
calling out to them. So I crawl up the shore and I find this the lamp, and I turn around the trees there, and there's a school bus, right? And like one of those like canopy tents set up for like when you're chilling outside. Um, and I'm like, okay, cool, no one's here. And I walk over to the tables, and it looks like they had a couple crock pots they cleaned. They're all soapy, so they're there. So I'm like, okay, it's like midnight. Maybe everyone's sleeping on the bus. And so I walk up to the bus. You could tell that there's bunk beds in it, so it's one of those like traveling buses. So I knock on the windows. I try to get people's attention. I flash my light in there. No one's in there. And there is an SUV that's there too, and it had
Hmm.
regular civilian plates, so it's just Missouri plates. Um, and so I'm like, okay, so these are normal people. They're here, whatever. I guess they're on a float trip because nobody was in this abandoned um,
Hmm.
campground I found. Because at first I was a little nervous, like what finding, tents in a school bus in the middle of nowhere. Like I was a little wary
Hmm.
about that. Um, but they had a bunch of cases of water. So I raided their water cases. I started
Yes,
like
yes.
guzzling them down. I started stuffing my backpack. But I wanted to make sure that they knew someone had been there and I was thankful
Hmm.
for the water. So I stacked up all my empty water bottles in the middle of their tent. just so they knew someone was there. Like it felt like the right thing to do. Um,
Mhm.
so
So if you're
anyway,
listening and you were in the Irish wilderness and you came back to your campsite and there was a stack of bottles out there, no, that was Nick Fisher. All right.
nope, it was Nick Fisher, Kevlar Joe, whatever you want to call me.
Yeah.
Um, so eventually I hiked back for what felt like forever on this gravel road.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know how much you know about like actually you would know about this, but for your listeners, how often owls are associated with the paranormal or especially UFOs. Um, and so so I'm hiking up this long empty road. I don't have the heebie-jeebies anymore, but I start hearing an owl in the woods. And I'm like, I
Oh.
can't do this right now. I can't deal with this. um, so I just hike by it, whatever. I keep looking behind me, nothing's there. But one thing I will say that I've done ever since I met Tim Alberino a couple years ago for the first unofficial BlurryCon, he
Mhm.
always said that people just don't look up anymore. But if you look up, you'll see some weird things. So when I was on the river that night, I would look up and you'd see weird lights dancing around the sky. It wouldn't just be like an orb, like going like what would be a plane flying straight. Um, and I've seen this a few times. It looks like a yellow, just a yellow orb in the sky, and it'll go straight, but it'll zigzag too, and just keep on going. And it's really odd. And I saw that a couple times while I was on the river, just looking up at the sky. Anyways, back to the hike. Um, and so I hike on this road. Eventually, I pass like uh couple it was like an industry, it was like a cabin building company. I couldn't see what it was, but they had a gate and a phone number on it. So I found out where I was. I had to like find a high ground and try to get service again. And I called my buddy at work who's 3 hours away, and I'm like, all right, can you take off and come get me? I'm lost. Here's my direction. He's like, I don't know if I can do that. Um, so I was like, good point. You're on duty. So eventually I called the local PD and I talked to some guy. And I was like, hey, I'm stuck in the Irish wilderness, but according to GPS, I'm by like Highway AA and 110. I don't remember if that's really what it was, but
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he goes, no, no, you can't be there if you're lost in the Irish wilderness. And I'm like, no, I crossed the river. And he's like, no, no, you don't cross the river. I was like, no, I crossed the river, you know. Um, so eventually he sends a deputy out to come get me. It takes about a half hour because there's only one deputy at night for the whole county. So eventually a deputy picks me up. I tell him like, hey, I'm also a cop. Do you mind coming getting me? I got lost, whatever. So eventually he comes and gets me. And I tell him my wild story. I didn't tell him about the weird paranormal stuff, but I tell him about how I was lost in the woods.
Right.
And he's like, I'm glad you're alive. Your wife is probably angry with you. My wife, at this point, I will say, my beautiful bride thinks that I decided to camp. Um, so um,
Uh,
so here's the wild part. So the wilderness is so big.
oh,
It's
this is the
actually
wild part. Okay.
yeah, oh well, I mean, no, but it took us 45 minutes to get back to my car. It felt forever because we had to go around the whole wilderness, which basically is they had to circumnavigate the whole county to get back to where my car was.
My
So
goodness.
that's how wild it was. My I can't trust this, but I had my running app on the whole time and it says I burnt 6,000 calories. I felt like I burnt way more. But
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, they always
um
shortchange you.
yeah. Um
Yeah.
but I'm trying to think if there's anything else I missed from that. Oh, so one thing I will say, whenever I was up on that hill before I like apologized to whatever it was and said, "Hey, I'm sorry I'm in your home. I just want to go home too." I don't know how to explain it, but if you've ever maybe been in a room and you could just sense like there's someone's there, right? You just know like someone's here, and then you turn around and someone else is in the room, or when you wake up and you're like you see light coming in, like you can acknowledge that there is light in the room, so therefore it is daytime. I don't know how I felt it, but when I was up there, the overwhelming feeling or sense of like I guess the word female was in my head, right? So I'm on this
Okay.
trail before I apologize, and I kept feeling like looking back on I couldn't shake this weird feeling. And to me, I've wondered if it was like a pheromone thing, like some
Mm-hmm.
animals, they'll release pheromones to say male in the area, like back off, like I'm the alpha male, and they can tell by pheromones,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I just can't, I couldn't shake that. Like it, something was just saying like it's really weird, but it just felt
Mm-hmm.
female, whatever it
It
was,
gave
and I
off a
couldn't shake.
feminine energy.
I don't know, but it was in my head, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was in my
Mm-hmm.
head that it's a female. I know that sounds really weird. I don't know how to describe it any other way,
Mm-hmm.
but that word was in my head,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
um, so
That doesn't necessarily mean you were safer, by the way. I think a
no,
lot of people,
not at all.
It's the whole Jurassic Park thing. You know, we
Hmm.
bred females. Yeah, the females in the animal kingdom tend to be a little more aggressive than the males.
Exactly. So that was just an odd thing. And
Yeah.
so the deputy takes me back to my car, drops me off. Super nice guy. And it takes me 3 hours to get home. I'm driving, but man, I tell you, I would never wanted to go into the woods again. Driving home, and while I was driving, I kept having to like get like I was getting like I would have to remind myself, Nick, you're not in the woods anymore. You're in your car. You're going home. Like it was like I kept having to remind myself, like, I'm safe now. Like that was, and not when I retell the story to my sister, who's a therapist, she's like, Nick, that's genuine trauma, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
That's a trauma response for sure.
yeah. And so at one point, like 2 hours later, I was passing like St. Francis State Park, which is kind of close to home, and you could smell the pine and the trees. And I guess just being on the highway, I could smell that again. I was like, I never want to smell that again. I rolled up my windows because it would just felt so horrible to smell nature.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, that's
Sorry,
that's
I
the
don't mean
whole.
to laugh at your trauma. I don't mean to laugh
Please,
at your trauma.
please
I really
laugh.
don't.
It's a unique experience.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that was the story. Um,
Wow. That's
now,
incredible.
um, something interesting about that. Um, gosh, there's a few interesting things. Like, I tried something. So the Irish Wilderness is inside of the Mark Twain National Forest.
Mm.
Um, and so Mark Twain is known for, I guess, maybe having a lot of weird things that happen there.
Mm-hmm.
So I text my cousin who lives in Donovan, Missouri, which is really close to the Irish Wilderness. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, I literally got lost in your neck of the woods the other day." And she goes, "Oh, over in the Irish?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Oh, we never go there. That place is haunted." And I was like, "Oh, is it now?" And then I go online, and I didn't realize how paranormal the area is apparently known to be. But I find like books dedicated, and not books, but like books that have whole chapters dedicated to just the Irish Wilderness, talking about how haunted it is and haunted stories from the area. Now I have a couple other tales of trying to hike in that area, like only 10 miles away,
Mm-hmm.
and really weird things happening up there too. But I won't digress. If you had any follow up questions for the Irish Wilderness hike.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. I just every time I hear that story, I'm just absolutely. I mean, now I will be honest with you. As you were telling the story, I mean, as you get towards the close of it, I was definitely like, I do think you experienced Bigfoot because of all of the phenomena that surrounded the experience with the the tree formations, with the rocks, with because like things that I've heard on other podcasts like Blurry Creatures and things um, when people talk about Bigfoot, they talk about Bigfoot will throw rocks.
Yeah.
Like when you listen to the guys that made the famous film, that was one of the things that they were talking about. Is that was one of the things that they heard was a
Mm-hmm.
rock being thrown, and then that's why they turned their camera to where it was, and they caught female. So they swear it was a female.
Oh,
That
the Patterson film. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Patterson film, yeah. They swear it was a female that they caught.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so and then you talked about the orbs. That follows that tracks.
Mm-hmm.
The tree formations again. The eerie feeling.
Yes.
Um,
I
like
got
that
goosebumps
is
just now
real.
talking about it.
Yeah, that because a lot of times, very rarely do I hear when people are talking about this experience that they had a positive
Mm-hmm.
experience. It usually is. It's almost kind of a primitive, um, fight or flight response to a larger predator.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were talking about that, and you were talking about being paralleled, one of the things I was going to ask you about it, but I'm not. I don't think it is now. But Dogman, you know, um, I know that the LBL is near or to the east
It's about
where
two
you
and a
are.
half hours from where I live. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I was just thinking because of the guttural
But
sound
they're
and the
both
howl.
connected by the same cave systems.
Right. And
Yes.
and that's the thing too that a lot of people don't realize is that this cave system
Hmm.
that you're talking about it spans much of the Appalachia,
Hmm.
like and the Ozarks and
Yes.
all of that. It's very and when you were talking about the caves being eerie, it
Hmm.
goes into that whole Ellie Marzulli and
Yeah.
the underground that these entities want to be underground that they're underground. You also have the Tuatha De Danann, which
Hmm.
is in Ireland, which were underground
I was.
giants.
That's a good connection right there.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm Irish, so I
Yes,
mean,
of
I'm
course.
literally, yeah, I'm literally third generation. I mean, my grandfather,
Mhm.
my great grandmother immigrated from Galway to this country, so I'm very connected to my Irish roots.
All I needed was to
And
find like the Book of Invasions in the cave.
right, exactly. I mean, yeah, it would be. I mean, a red-headed giant coming out, and it's the giant of Kandahar situation, but this time in the Irish wilderness.
Now, not
Uh-oh.
far from these caves in Steelville, Missouri, back in the
Hmm.
1920s, they found giant skeletons, which were removed and taken back to the Smithsonian. Um, I have a couple of his books.
Well, that's actually going
Hunt
to be
Zimmerman.
two guests from now. I'm going to be talking with Travis from American Giants or Giants of
Okay.
Ancient America. I'm actually going to be speaking with him, and I remember he talks about that because he has an archive of I think over 800 newspaper articles
Hmm.
spanning from the late 1800s to like around the 1940s talking about these giants, and that's one of the caves that that's one
Excellent.
of them that they're talking about. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, so listening to the story, and again, we're going to be wrapping up here pretty soon because I already
Hmm.
had my oldest daughter like peek her head in.
Okay.
But okay, but and I want to get you back on because I want to. Matter of fact, I was searching, I was trying to find out when we have Vicky Joy.
Hmm.
Um, we're going to have her come back on, but if you are interested, that might be a great time to have you come on
Yeah.
and
Sounds
kind of
great.
tell your story about sleep paralysis
Hmm.
because she's going to be on. That'd be a great opportunity for y'all to get to reconnect. I don't know if y'all have met with each other or not.
Not yet. Not yet, unfortunately.
Okay, okay. Well, I'd love to get you guys connected,
Sure.
especially since y'all are near each other, and that's the whole purpose of this podcast.
Hmm.
That's one of the expressed missions of this podcast. Is the reason why I call it the Christian Underground. Is this is to get people connected with each
Hmm.
other around this crazy weirdness, but also if ever it came to a point in this nation where being a Christian is illegal, we have this network of people
Absolutely.
that we can lean on, and so that's
Hmm.
the whole purpose of all this. And but there's a lot of layers to this onion, but so I guess the question here is so when you're going through this um, and you're experiencing this, you spoke about you know you spoke about that the hair on the back of your neck, right,
Hmm.
standing up. That like, and you're someone who's been in a combat zone.
Hmm.
Okay, you've been exposed to what it feels like. I'm sure you've probably experienced maybe some mortar attacks and things like that because that
Hmm.
was pretty common with people that were in Afghanistan. I have several friends that spent more than one tour in Afghanistan, and that's one of the things they talked about was the
Sure.
mortar
Hmm.
attacks and the
Pretty
IEDs
frequent.
and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so you kind of understand. Plus, being a law enforcement officer, you've been put in situations where you've got a pretty heightened um, you know danger spidey sense.
I
Um,
should hope so by now.
I would yeah. Otherwise, I mean, yeah. I would hope you do, and I think you do, and I think that's what was pinging. Would you say that? How would you rate that? like when you're walking through the forest, because you just
Hmm.
talked about, I mean, this is a trauma response. I mean, you're talking about you're in the car and you're having to reassure yourself that you're not being followed. You're having to reassure yourself that you're not still in the woods.
Hmm.
um, how would you rate, like, on your spotty sense tingling scale? Where do you think you were, like, especially going up that hill?
You mean like on how close I was to danger and death?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that goes into another thing because you'd asked about Dogman, right?
Right.
So a lot of those symptoms have reminded me about Bigfoot. They were Bigfoot indicators, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I could never understand the howl and the growl, right? That
Mm-hmm.
weirded me out. Um, but so people don't typically have, and not to say like bad luck or been cursed when they meet Bigfoot, but typically when people encounter, just from other stories and lore, when they have dogman encounters, or skinwalker encounters, um, bad things kind of follow them, or they get attached. Not attached, but I hate the word curse, but bad things tend to happen. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Attachment would
didn't,
be a good term. I mean,
yeah,
because it does happen. It does
it
happen.
does. Now
Even with the best intentions.
I'm a bit elusive on the right terminology for using attachment and Christians,
Mm-hmm.
maybe
Mm-hmm.
followed. I think followed is more appropriate for if you truly are saved, but that's another
I think,
discussion for another time. Um,
yeah, that'll be the next podcast.
yeah. But
Yeah.
so when I got home, we had the absolute worst, one of the worst weeks of our life. My wife immediately got COVID. My son, who has
Mm-hmm.
never been sick before, had started having seizures. So we spent a couple days in the hospital with him. Both of our cars break down, and then while my in-laws are watching our other kids, my wife's brother um, has a seizure and gets knocked unconscious. And I remember thinking, this is the worst week of our lives. And I remember thinking, did something follow me home? Like super weird. Um, and then I also have wondered. I don't know if you follow Tales from the Grid Square, but it's
Mm-hmm.
basically
Mm-hmm.
it's a guy. I think he's still in the army, but he tells his weird paranormal stories. And when he tells his Dogman stories, that's the first time
Mm-hmm.
I've ever heard someone describe a howl and a growl that turned into a growl, almost immediately. And the way he told his story was identical to how I described that weird thing in the woods. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm thinking that's weird because there's multiple Dogman indicators and there's multiple Bigfoot indicators. Um, and so that's I'm glad you brought up Dogman because now whenever I think of it, this is my kind of a weird out there theory. If I can get a little
Mm-hmm.
fringy, not that we're already
Of
there,
course, that's the
but
purpose.
part of me's wondered if there was a Dogman in that area, that howl that I heard, and that I know this is goofy sounding, but maybe when I was being paralleled, maybe whatever it was keeping me safe.
And see, I've heard stories about um, Bigfoot doing that.
And that,
Like,
yes, I've heard that too. Um,
mhm,
and
mhm, that
then like
Bigfoot will keep you safe.
and then
Mhm,
I thought about that, and when I think about like the weird female thing, and I don't know if it has
mhm,
anything to do with it, but maybe that was meant to be some kind of a comfort thing or like a mama bear thing. I don't know.
mhm.
I really don't.
And maybe the stone wasn't for you. Maybe the rock being thrown wasn't for you. Maybe the rock being thrown was for the dog man, kind
I,
of saying, "Stay away from
gosh,
this guy." Well,
I don't
because here's,
know,
I think,
but
I think. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
no, no,
I just
no,
wanted to,
go.
because and I think this leads to the next question. Okay. Um, there's definitely, and man, this may end up turning into a two-parter.
Oh no.
And just to kind of keep the time where it
Mhm.
is. But I'm just enjoying this conversation so much, or I might trim some more off the front. I don't know. And I'm definitely trimming this out. But no, but like, I really, it kind of goes into this whole idea of what is Bigfoot,
Yes.
because there's definitely a tendency with the church that anything that it doesn't understand, or anything that is not clearly defined in the Bible, is
Mhm.
demonic.
It's a demon. Yep.
Okay. And, and I'll admit, I was definitely one of these people. I mean,
I was too.
before I, yeah, before I got into this. But there's so many stories. Now, granted, I'm willing to admit that it could be part of the whole deception
Yes. Hmm.
and to get you to trust Bigfoot, right? But there's so many stories of that I've heard in this sphere, listening to Bigfoot stories of Bigfoot protecting people that it trusts
Hmm.
from entities that are doesn't matter. It's gonna hurt you.
Hmm.
There was a story that I heard on Blurry Creatures about a guy who had Bigfoot that would visit his farm on a regular
Yeah, I heard
basis.
that
He had
one.
gotten in,
Hmm.
yeah, and he would, and then there was a battle literally that
Hmm.
happened in his backyard between
With
these entities.
the crocodilian or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, with these entities, and and it was the Bigfoot keeping him safe.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of one of the things that I'm like, okay, and it really, so it goes into that whole, what is Bigfoot? Is
Yeah.
Bigfoot actually our, missing link brother, or
I
a form? I don't know.
I have heard so many horror stories about Bigfoot, but I've also heard so
Mm,
many benevolent stories that it's like a 50-50 gander, whether it's going to be good or bad experience. I would not say that anything about that experience was good until I looked back on it and I tried to look at some of the symptoms or indicators of what was happening. And I think, man, what if I was being shielded, as I walked up
mm,
that hill, whatever
mm.
paralleled me so close was keeping me safe. Because typically, if
Well,
you've ever a lot of weird dogman and Bigfoot encounters that you people retell or the lore that goes along with it, Bigfoot always keeps dogman at bay, or dogman does not come near Bigfoot. Like Bigfoot, like dogman might come in the area, but Bigfoot or dogman will not approach the Bigfoot um, with any kind of intention to bother it or fight it. So I look back at that and it kind of blows my mind because this whole story, I have to remind myself that I really experienced this. Like I really had to dig deep and survive. And I'm proud of myself. It's a really cool story.
yeah, it's a great
But
story.
yeah, but like thinking that, I mean, the Bigfoot thing blows my mind, but like the dog man thing too, it's wild to think about. And, like it sounds hard to believe, I'm sure if you're on the outside of it. But like when I
Yeah.
look at the weird stuff, the weird stuff that followed us home, and the weird howl and growl, which other people have confirmed through their experiences, that is the same noise that Dogman makes in the woods. And I don't know, man. It's weird. But
Well,
others,
and I know that wolves, um, they actually do. I forget the term, but part of their growl is almost
mhm,
like it's more than just a growl. It's like there's an echo, or not an echolocation. It's like what we use with LRAD,
mhm,
right? Where
okay,
it's kind of like what dolphins do,
sure,
because
yeah,
dolphins can stun people with sonar, or stun their prey with sonar. It's the same thing with wolves. That their growl is so low, and it's
mhm,
on such a low register that you can feel it in your body. You know what I mean? Like you
yeah,
can literally feel it resonate with inside you.
mhm,
And that's one of the reasons why we have that predatory prey, response when it comes to those creatures. Is because it's part of that essence. And I have a husky, which is
yeah,
a Siberian husky, which is kind of the closest that you can legally get to owning a wolf.
sure,
And there are times that her growl is like, okay, like, and she has different growls too. Like I know what her growl is. I know when she's protecting us and when she's playing,
mhm,
and that's something I mean, we'll definitely get into this a little bit more in depth. Matter of fact, I'd like to have you back on to really cover this again, even if it's
sure. I'd
without
love to.
Vicky.
Yeah,
Matter of fact, you're welcome on this show anytime you'd like.
I've got plenty of other hikes where weird stuff happened in the same woods. Oh,
Well, we're
well,
gonna.
I'll just say this. If I tried to do the whole trail that night, I would have died because me and my buddies went back and tried to do the trail again, and taking the route I should have gone, the south side. We barely made it out ourselves. We had to give up halfway through. So
Wow.
that was also Providence that kept going back to the river because I would have never made it out. So
Wow. Well, there you go. And so yeah, we're definitely going to have you. We gotta find a stopping point. But and I hate it because I'm really enjoying this. But yeah, we'll have you on the podcast. Feel free to come on anytime you want. And definitely if you have any new coffee or anything that comes up, like if you get a new
will
flavor, we
do.
definitely want to highlight that for sure. But Ben, just want to let you know, I just absolutely thank you for coming on this. This is a great experience. Guys that are listening, if you made it to this point, more power to you. I appreciate it so much. I appreciate everybody that's been part of this journey, that's continuing to be part of this journey. Make sure that you're going to kevlarjoescoffee.com to check out all of their amazing flavors, and really support this small business. We'd love to make it to where he's making so much money and having so much time roasting coffee that he could give up his federal job and be able to do this full time. With that being said, I want to thank you again, Nick, for being on here. And may God bless you. May He keep you. May He shine His countenance upon you and give you peace. And with that, we are out. And I am going to stop recording.